Are we saving the wrong bees? What comes to mind when people think about saving the bees? They picture backyard hives, urban beekeeping, honey, and saving the most important animal in the world, honeybees. Now, what if I said this is all wrong? Would you be surprised to hear that honeybees don't need our help? That honeybee populations have been ever increasing. What if I went so far as to say honeybees could actually be part of the problem? But wait, how can increasing bee populations be a problem? And if the honeybee doesn't need our help, what does? What does all this saving the bees talk about then? Well, today I'm going to tell you exactly what saving the bees really means. And it's probably not what you think. When people say save the bees, what they mean, even if they don't know it, is save the wild bees, not the honeybees. Let's get into it. What comes to mind when you think of a bee? Most people's minds immediately go to a beehive, which is inhabited by the honeybee. The honeybee is a very important animal for sure. Honeybees are what is known as a general pollinator, which means they can pollinate most plants. Honeybees live in hives and produce large amounts of honey. Honeybee populations have been increasing for decades, due mainly to huge popularity of backyard hives and harvesting of honey. Truly, honeybees are living the dream and are not endangered of becoming extinct. So, what then is the Save the Bees movement about? Well, there is a bee that needs our help, now more than ever, and that bee is the wild bee. There are about 20,000 different kinds of wild bee. They are solitary creatures and do not generally live in hives. Therefore, keeping them like a honeybee is not possible. Wild bees are what's known as specific pollinators. In contrast to a honeybee, which is a general pollinator, wild bees are better at pollinating their specific plants. For example, some of our favorite foods, tomatoes, potatoes, and eggplants, need wild bees to pollinate them, as they require a vibrating buzz to release their pollen. This is something the bumblebee provides perfectly, but honeybees just don't have that skill. Other examples include squash and cucumbers, which have flowers that are only open in the early morning. Wild bees, being the early birds that they are, can take advantage of this, while honeybees are still fast asleep during this very vital time. A final favorite, apples, would require tens of thousands of honeybees to pollinate a single hectare of an orchard land, whereas a wild bee could handle that same space in the numbers of just a few hundred. As you can see, as far as crops go, wild bees are much more efficient at pollinating than honeybees are. And unfortunately, it's the wild bee populations that are on the decline, habitat loss being one of the largest causes. But there is another unfortunate cause, the honeybee. You might ask, how can having more bees be a problem? Surely backyard honeybee hives are helping the cause overall, even if they're not as efficient as wild bees. But this isn't correct. Honeybees are part of the problem for wild bees. Honeybee hives are very large, sometimes into the tens of thousands, and with those numbers, they will outcompete all the wild bees for resources, often not leaving enough floral resources for any other pollinating species. The troubling issue is that there is no simple solution. It's much easier to set up a honeybee habitat than it is for wild bees. It also isn't as fun or profitable to invest in making an ideal wild habitat for bees, as it is to set up the same type of habitat for a honeybee. But it's not an impossible task. There are things you can do to help. You can plant native flowers. Your local wild bees need plenty of native flowers for food. Planting native flowers will ensure that it's something your local bees are looking for. Another option is planting native trees. Did you know that bees get a lot of their pollen not just from flowers but from trees? Trees benefit bees in a lot of ways, as many bees make homes in trees as well as using them as a pollen source. One of the most important things you can do is go pesticide free. There have been a lot of studies on just how much pesticides are impacting bees. Though there's not a direct number and correlation, there is one thing we know for sure, and that is pesticides are a major contributor in the overall decline and health of bees. You can also donate to a Save the Bee program to help save wild bee habitats and build more protection areas for wild bees to live. The last option is not a fun one, but eliminate or reducing the number of backyard honeybees so that wild bees do not need to compete for their food. This will be a hard one, as keeping wild bees certainly doesn't have the same buzz to it as honeybee hives do. And I truly need to practice what I preach here, as I myself plan to have a honeybee hive. But I don't plan to expand the operation above a hive or two. Studying honeybees in their daily lives has been a passion of mine for quite some time, so I do desire to have a hive to film and observe their day-to-day activities. But I also haven't forgotten my wild bee friends, and I will do what I can to have them both live in harmony, which is large areas so that they don't need to compete with each other, and lots of wild flowers for the other bees and all the honeybees to enjoy. After all, we're called the Tangled Flock Farm for a reason. To recap, honeybee populations are increasing and have been for quite some time. This is due to backyard popularity for honeybee hives and the desire for people to produce their own honey. Wild bees are becoming endangered. Honeybees and wild bees compete for the same food, honeybees being part of the problem as their incredible numbers destroy all available floral resources for the wild bees to eat. Wild bees are better pollinators, which means they are more important overall to our crops than honeybees are. That being said, there's an important balance that we can strike between the two. Both types of bees can live in harmony, but we need to get it out of our mind that the idea of saving the bees means saving honeybees. We need to do our part to help save the wild bees, which includes planting the crops that they also like to eat, and not pushing them out of their natural habitats by creating so many honeybee hives that they have nothing else to eat. Thank you for watching.